In this video, Costa Rica versus Panama. Today we're going to dive into a comprehensive comparison of the two most popular Central American destinations for expats. So whether you're looking for a new place to call home or just exploring your options, we've got you covered. Let's start with a brief overview. First up, let's talk about the cost of living. How do Costa Rica and Panama stack up? Well, Costa Rica is seen as slightly more expensive than Panama, particularly in popular expat areas like the Central Valley and in the beaches. Housing, groceries, and dining out can add up, and it's all going to be a little bit more expensive in Costa Rica. However, Panama, on the other hand, tends to have a lower cost of living, especially outside of Panama City. So utilities are going to be cheaper in Panama. Groceries are going to be cheaper in Panama. Energy is going to be cheaper. Gasoline is probably going to be cheaper. And healthcare is going to be cheaper in Panama as well. Food's going to be cheaper in general. Going out to restaurants is going to be cheaper. I think everything is going to be slightly cheaper in Panama. If you really want a super low-cost destination, you might want to look elsewhere like Guatemala or Nicaragua or Honduras. Costa Rica and Panama are pretty similar in prices, but I would say that Panama is overall more affordable and Costa Rica is more expensive. Costa Rica is known as the most expensive country in Latin America, probably tied with Uruguay. I would probably even argue Costa Rica is more expensive than Uruguay, making Costa Rica by far the most expensive country in Latin America. Now, this may come as a bit of a surprise because Costa Rica has its own currency, whereas Panama uses the US dollar. It's 100% dollarized. Now, there are a number of countries in Latin America that are dollarized, and on average, dollarized countries are a little bit more expensive than the average. So in that sense, Costa Rica is a bit of an outlier or a bit of an exception to the rule, being so expensive even though it has its own currency. So I pulled up this website called numbeo.com and I created a cost of living comparison between San Jose and Panama City. Now, these are the two capital cities, the two largest cities in Costa Rica and Panama. And obviously, it's not a super apples to apples comparison because San Jose is a little bit more local. Panama City is a little bit more international. It's more of a financial center. But here's a comparison anyway. So it says that the cost of living in Panama City is lower than in San Jose without rent, which is surprising. And then cost of living, including rent in Panama City, is higher than Costa Rica. So rent prices in Panama City are 37% higher than in San Jose, which is a little bit surprising, but definitely makes sense. And then it says that restaurant prices in Panama City are higher, grocery prices are lower. And here it gives some specific examples on this website regarding a little bit of everything involved in cost of living, sports and leisure, utilities, and so forth. And you can kind of go into more detail in your own time with this website Numbeo, and you can even kind of select your own cities and create your own comparisons. And the reason this isn't the best apples to apples comparison is because Panama City kind of makes sense that rent is more expensive because it's a financial center. It's much more international. You have more business people, you have more business activity, you have more things going on. And I would say that expats and digital nomads are more likely to spend time in Panama City. Whereas when people go to San Jose and when people go to Costa Rica, they typically don't stay in San Jose. So in that sense, Panama City is a much more livable city, and San Jose is a much less livable city. Panama City is also on the coast, by the way, so it has, sweeping ocean views in Panama City, whereas San Jose is inland and at a higher elevation. So they are different in that sense, where if you want a high elevation mountain city, that's more of a San Jose vibe. And if you want more of a, like a Havana, Cuba, Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, Panama City, Panama type of vibe, it's on the ocean, it's more humid. That's what you're going to get in Panama City. But without a doubt, Panama City is more international and more business centered. And for that reason, it kind of makes sense that rent is more expensive in Panama City. But even though it's more humid, it's probably arguably a much more livable city as well. By all accounts, San Jose is a little bit ugly and not very livable. Another important topic we need to address is flight connections and access to Panama versus Costa Rica. Because obviously, if you're coming as a retiree or an expat, you need to consider that you have obligations back home. Maybe you want to spend 6 months a year in your hometown and then 6 months a year in Central America, such as in the winter. Maybe you have business meetings back in the States. Maybe you want to go home for Christmas every year, and you're probably going to have random periodic obligations throughout the year. You got to go to weddings and things like that. So it is really important to consider the flight connections. And me personally, I really optimize for direct nonstop flights because I really am not a big fan of layovers. They complicate things in a lot of different ways. So you probably know that Panama City is the hub of the Americas when it comes to flights. It's a huge flight hub. It's very well connected. And Panama City has 92 destinations, which is really, really good. And if we go over to look at San Jose, the SJO airport has 52 destinations, so almost half. So San Jose is significantly less connected to the rest of the world compared to Panama. And I'm just curious, so let's look at the destinations that San Jose has. And by the way, I'm on flightsfrom.com. It's a pretty good website. So we have some destinations in Europe. We have Madrid, we have Zurich, we have London, Paris, Frankfurt. So we have some connections from Europe direct to San Jose, Costa Rica, which is good, actually more than I was suspecting or expecting. But what I'm noticing here is a lot less connectivity to South America compared to what I would have expected. So we have direct to Sao Paulo, which is good, kind of surprising. We have Lima, we have Quito, we have Bogota, Medellin, and Cartagena, but really not much else. I mean, there's no Buenos Aires, there's no Santiago, obviously there's no Paraguay. So really a lot less connected in South America than I would have expected. So if you're an international business person or maybe you have Paraguay residency or something, it's going to be harder to get to Costa Rica. And if we look at the US and Canada, I'm noticing now that there's no direct flight from, say, Vancouver or Calgary, which to me seems like a lost opportunity. I'm kind of surprised I don't have that. And even in the US, it's a little bit more limited than I would have thought. So the only West Coast flight is Los Angeles and Denver. So if you're on the West Coast of Canada or the US, Costa Rica is not looking good for you in terms of flight connectivity. So we got some Texas here. We got to have Atlanta, right? Yeah, so we got Atlanta. We got Miami, obviously. No direct Boston either, which is surprising. So we got Montreal, we got Toronto, we got Chicago, but no Boston, which is a little bit surprising. And yeah. So overall, San Jose is just a lot less connected. And if we went back and looked at Panama City and looked at the routes here, you can see that there's a lot more routes, particularly to South America. So you can get to all different places in Brazil. You can get direct to Uruguay. You can get Buenos Aires. A ton of different destinations in Argentina. Direct to Paraguay, Chile. Even more destinations in, say, Venezuela and in the Caribbean. So much, much more connected in the Caribbean as well. Looks like more connections in Central America. And then when we look at the US and Canada, looking pretty similar. We do have direct Boston, which is a step up. We have direct SFO, which is good. We have direct Las Vegas. So still no direct Vancouver or Calgary, which is kind of surprising. But overall, Panama is more connected to the USA and has a couple routes that San Jose is kind of lacking. SFO, Vegas, and Boston come to mind. And then Europe-wise, they have an Istanbul flight, which is actually huge because let's just say maybe you do some time in Panama City, you do some time in Dubai or somewhere in Asia, the Middle East, or Africa, this Istanbul flight is really, really key. So the fact that there's Panama City, Istanbul direct is huge, and that's something that San Jose is missing as well. Okay, so this is the flight connectivity, a department in which Panama clearly wins over Costa Rica. Next up, let's talk about climate. What can expats expect in terms of the weather? So Costa Rica boasts a diverse climate due to its varied geography. You can find everything from tropical beaches to cool mountain regions. The Central Valley area of Costa Rica offers an eternal spring climate that expats and especially retirees absolutely love. They say the weather is near perfect. Whereas in coastal areas and beach towns, it's going to be a lot warmer, a lot more humid. You don't have that elevation, and obviously you're pretty close to the equator. So it's going to be a little bit more buggy and a lot more humid near the beach. So kind of your two choices in both Costa Rica and in Panama is, do you want to be in the mountains and have cooler, crisper air? Or do you want to be on the beach and have that beach lifestyle, but it comes at the cost of being more humid and having more bugs and that kind of thing? So Panama also has a tropical climate, has a similar rainy season. Both Costa Rica and Panama have a rainy season from May to November. And then coastal areas like Bocas del Toro in Panama are very hot and humid, very similar to the beach towns of Costa Rica. Whereas in the highlands of Panama, like Boquete, which is a coffee region, it's going to offer those cooler temperatures and be similar to Costa Rica. So I would argue in terms of climate in Costa Rica and Panama that Costa Rica wins in terms of overall being a country with better climate. And I think the reason that I would make that argument is because there's just more options for mountain towns in Costa Rica. A popular one is La Fortuna. Everybody loves that place. Anywhere near Arenal and this lake, so Laguna de Arenal, really good weather region here, like perfect weather. And there's other places kind of all around the Central Valley of Costa Rica with really perfect weather. Personally, I'm a huge fan of that coffee zone type of weather. Kind of reminds you of Medellin in Colombia. And so I think Costa Rica rather, just has a lot more options for different good weather mountain towns. Whereas in Panama, the only sort of good weather mountain town areas are up here near Boquete, Volcancito, and Volcan. Volcan's kind of on the other side of the mountain over here. So that's kind of what you're looking at. Like if you want really, really good weather in Panama, you're going to be in this area in western Panama, really close to the border with Costa Rica. And the downside of this area is that you're a little bit far from the airport. Obviously, you're very far from the Panama City airport. This is about a 6-hour drive, maybe more. And there is a smaller airport here in David. And then you would drive kind of like an hour up to Boquete or Volcan. But, it's an extra flight to get to David or a very long drive. Whereas if you flew into, say, San Jose or one of the other airports near here, you're going to be closer to your little mountain town. So I think there's arguably more access to the good weather mountain towns in Costa Rica. So you have more options for good weather mountain towns. And I would say you have slightly better access to get to those mountain towns in Costa Rica. Whereas in Panama, it's a little bit more limited. And then you're probably curious about maybe the weather zones of the rest of Panama. So Panama definitely has more varied weather overall than Costa Rica. And I'll give like a brief description. So here in Bocas del Toro, you're going to have basically that Caribbean humidity and beaches. It's kind of effectively like a Cancun type of weather. And then here on this peninsula called the Azero Peninsula, I believe it's called, it's going to be more dry. So this area has the least rain out of any area in Panama, which is somewhat reflected in, it's obviously still quite green. But it's quite dry as well. At least by Panama standards, this is the driest area of Panama, sorry. And then you have Panama City, which is pretty humid all year round, pretty muggy. The best weather is roughly from December to April. And then you have this area called Colon and the San Blas Islands and Portobello and this whole area up here. And again, it's just very Caribbean, kind of similar to like a Cancun. And then kind of in the quote unquote south or near the Colombian border, you have the Darien Gap area. And this is just pure jungle. And there's, you'd probably never go there, just pure jungle. So your kind of options for weather in Panama is you have Panama City, and it's quite muggy. You have these islands here that there are some expats on. You have the Azero Peninsula with Las Tablas, Chitre. I think there's one called Potosi, and then Venao down here. And it's going to be dry, and it's pretty cool, honestly, but it's also, the downside is it's quite far from the Panama City airport. And then you have the best weather out here, out in the mountains. Again, the problem is it is slightly remote. So overall, I would say that Costa Rica wins in terms of good weather and accessible good weather. Panama arguably has more options for different biospheres, but they're so far from the airport that that's a little bit of the downside. Next up, let's talk about the ease of obtaining residency. Which country is it easier to get residency in? Which country is it easier to maintain residency, maybe in the form of low physical presence? Which country is more expat friendly? So let's get into that. So both countries have programs to attract expats and particularly retirees, but they differ in their requirements. So Costa Rica offers the Pensionado program for retirees with a monthly pension of at least $1,000. They also offer a rentista program that retires proof of $2,500 of monthly income, and that would be passive income, or you could do a $60,000 bank deposit in a Costa Rican bank. So a couple different options there. $1,000 pension as a retiree, $2,500 passive income for all ages, or $60,000 bank deposit for all ages. So that bank deposit option I think is a pretty good option for younger digital nomads, by the way. You know, if you're in your 20s, you probably don't have that passive income yet. So you can do that bank deposit option if you really want to get Costa Rican residency. Now with Panama, they have a couple different options. They used to have the Friendly Nations visa. They got rid of the Friendly Nations visa about 2 years ago in 2022, I believe, or at least they got rid of the most popular version of it where you created a company and then put $5,000 in the bank. So that program doesn't exist anymore. So there are other options, but for younger people, it's a little bit more complicated. The Pensionado program is still legit in Panama. So you just need to show $1,000 monthly pension in Panama. So the exact same as Costa Rica. So from a pensioner perspective, both Costa Rica and Panama have very similar programs. You could even do both, by the way, but very similar for pensioners. And then for younger people who want to go to Panama, it's a little bit more complicated. So you can buy a property. I know they're raising the minimum requirements in terms of how much you have to invest. Don't quote me on the numbers because I'm kind of doing this off my head, but you know, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that you have to invest in property or in, there's a couple different options. I think you can get certificates of deposit or invest in the stock market, etc. But you'd have to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars typically to do it via the investor route. Or there is an additional option in Panama where you can start a company in Panama and then sponsor yourself as the employee of that company. So it's a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more of a creative option that we've started doing for our clients now that the typical Friendly Nations visa is no longer possible. So I do know Canadians and stuff like that have done this successfully. You start a company, you sponsor yourself. It's a little bit more complicated. You'll probably need to spend a little bit more time in Panama to get this whole thing set up because it's going to involve a number of steps. So it's 100% doable, and we do offer this program as well at My Latin Life. So overall, in terms of ease of residency, I'd probably say Costa Rica is easier, especially for younger people because they have that $60K bank deposit option. Whereas in Panama, you're going to have to do that company route, okay? I guess technically in some ways the company route is easier because you don't have to put up 60K, but you do have to be on the ground and more involved in the process. And the cost of doing the whole setup is a little bit more expensive. I think it's around $8,000 to do the entire company setup and sponsor yourself, etc. So yeah, that's some of the options for residency in Costa Rica and Panama. Again, My Latin Life, we're a full-scale immigration firm. We can help you in Panama, in Costa Rica, and in any country in Latin America to get residency and as part of your holistic plan as well, whether as a plan A or a plan B. Oh, and the last thing I didn't mention about residency is physical presence requirements. So Panama, you only have to visit Panama once every 2 years to keep your residency active, whereas in Costa Rica, technically you actually need to spend 6 months a year there to keep that active, but they don't really enforce that. And in practice, it's 1 day a year to keep it active. So 1 day a year in Costa Rica with an asterisk, and 1 day every 2 years in Panama. So the Panama one's easier to maintain. Okay, next up, let's talk about healthcare. How do the healthcare systems compare in Costa Rica versus Panama? So Costa Rica is known for its high quality healthcare system. The doctors are going to speak really good English. It's really quite modern. There's public and private options, but the wait times can be quite long in the public system, and the private healthcare system is excellent, but it's going to be a lot more expensive than Panama. So Panama has an even higher standard of healthcare. They have many doctors trained in the US and Europe. They'll speak good English in Panama as well. But overall, I think that the hospital options are better in Panama, especially Panama City. And they're just going to have better machines. They're going to be able to treat more complicated things. People from all over Central America and really all over Latin America go to Panama when they need things done from a healthcare perspective. I've done certain healthcare things in Panama. I've gone to the dentist in Panama and had a really good experience. And by all accounts, healthcare, if you pay out of pocket, if you pay cash, is going to be significantly cheaper in Panama than it is in Costa Rica. Again, goes back to how Costa Rica has a higher cost of living, and that includes higher cost of healthcare if you pay out of pocket. Insurance is a whole other bag of worms. Both countries have insurance plans available to you. So if you're looking to move to Costa Rica or Panama on a long-term basis as a retiree or expat, yes, you can get healthcare for yourself as well as your whole family. But in the healthcare department overall, I'm definitely going to say that Panama is the better option. So what about safety and lifestyle? So Costa Rica is generally considered safe, but I would actually argue that Costa Rica is less safe than its reputation. You might be surprised to hear this, but Costa Rica is considered significantly less safe than its neighboring country, Nicaragua. So I know Nicaragua might sound like a scary country if you've never been, and Costa Rica sounds like a happy, safe country if you've never been, but the reality on the ground is that Nicaragua is like 10 times safer than Costa Rica. Seriously, it's kind of crazy. Maybe that's partly due to the high cost of living in Costa Rica, and so the locals are feeling the pinch. I think there's a lot of factors there, but Costa Rica over the past 10 years has been getting progressively more dangerous. And then Panama, I'd say Panama and Costa Rica are probably about the same level of safety. Panama might be considered slightly safer. I don't know. It's probably about the same. But overall, Nicaragua is going to be safer if you really are optimizing for safety. And El Salvador obviously is going to be even safer now that the new president Bukele is there, and they did all the crazy changes there. So the safest countries in Central America actually aren't, we're not even talking about today. The safest ones are El Salvador and Nicaragua. And then Costa Rica and Panama, I'd probably give it basically about a tie. I might even give Panama the lead just because Costa Rica has so many expats that they probably have a lot of systems in place for, I don't know, doing burglary or just like random tourist scam type of stuff. Whereas Panama is more of a normal country. It's not as tourism dependent. And countries and cities that are less tourism dependent typically have lower crime because tourist areas kind of bring a lot of crime, people kind of looking to take advantage of the situation. So I'd probably give Panama a little bit of the lead in terms of safety, but honestly, it's pretty close. And then in terms of lifestyle, really good question. I would probably say Costa Rica definitely has the better lifestyle. It's just got so many different cool beach towns and mountain towns, and it has more tourist infrastructure. You know, if you want somebody to bring you to a waterfall, or I guess bottom line, you want to enjoy a waterfall, and you know, there's clean water and just like good infrastructure, like a good hiking trail, all that type of stuff. I think Costa Rica just has better infrastructure. It's more maintained overall. Sort of almost feels like Disneylandified in how well set up the nature and the infrastructure is in some places. And, you know, it's probably more hippie-ish. It's a little bit more expat friendly overall. There's just a higher concentration or percentage of expats in Costa Rica. So it's going to be a little bit more gentrified, more nice coffee shops and things like that. So overall, I'm going to give Costa Rica the lead in terms of lifestyle. Also has more options in terms of beach towns and in terms of mountain towns. So having more options also impacts kind of having a better lifestyle, and you can kind of go up and down the coast and check out different areas of the country and so forth. So lifestyle, I'll give the W to Costa Rica. Finally, let's talk about the culture and the language. So what can you expect as an expat in terms of cultural differences, in terms of English levels? So let's talk about that a bit. So Costa Rica is known for being really friendly towards expats. You know, maybe you've heard the pura vida phrase, where pure life, like everything's chill, and the locals are very welcoming. The country has a strong emphasis on environmental conservation, sustainability, hippie type vibes, and Spanish is the official language, but English is widely spoken in expat areas. Arguably, Costa Rica has a higher level of English than Panama, even though Panama was an American colony, or at least parts of Panama were an American colony for a very long period of time. So Panama arguably has more American influence, but the level of English will be slightly lower. People are going to know a decent amount of English in Panama, but in terms of overall level of fluency and the number of people who are fluent in English, it's going to be much higher in Costa Rica, partly because the economy in the country relies so much more heavily on tourism. Panama is also a melting pot of cultures. So it's a global trading hub. So you might be surprised to know that there's a lot of Chinese people in Panama. There's a good number of Indians. There's a good number of Arab immigrants as well. Tons of African influence, obviously. Much more indigenous influence in Panama. I'd say Panama has a much higher percentage of indigenous people overall compared to Costa Rica. There's even like departments or different parts of Panama territories that are like indigenous. I think they're called comarcas, basically like indigenous run areas of the country. And people arguably look more physically indigenous and kind of have more indigenous blood in Panama. At least that's my personal experience. So in Panama, you know, just have a more of a melting pot of different cultures. You have African culture, you have Gringo American culture, you have Spanish culture, lots of Chinese people, a little bit of everything, right? So Panama is more international, obviously, whereas Costa Rica is going to be kind of a mix of more, like, it's just going to be less international in that sense. Like, there's lots of people from North America, obviously, some Europeans, lots of African communities, especially along the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, but it's more predominantly kind of Spanish culture, I would say. So I guess what other cultural differences can I mention? I would say also that Panama overall has more of like a Caribbean type of vibe overall, whereas Costa Rica has a little bit more of that like mountain town type of vibe, gentrified type of vibe, maybe a little bit more conservative overall. whereas Panama is a little bit more carefree. So I'd say Panama is more that carefree Caribeño type of vibe, influences from Jamaica as well, and just like lots of like coastal chill lifestyle type of vibe, whereas Costa Rica is a little bit more of a conservative, serious type of vibe to some extent. But I don't know, they both really have a lot of similarities. Both countries speak a similar type of Spanish, like they use a lot of the same slang and have a lot of cultural similarities, and borrow from each other's cultures a lot. I'd probably say Costa Rica borrows more from Panama culture than Panama borrows from Costa Rica culture. I think Costa Rica probably thinks about Panama more than Panama thinks about Costa Rica, if that makes sense. So Panama's overall a more important country, obviously from an international trade perspective and just regionally as well. So hopefully some of these anecdotes and observations that I've had shed a little bit more light on what you can expect in the different countries. So with that, there you have it, folks. A detailed comparison of Costa Rica and Panama for expats. Both countries have a lot to offer, and the best choice depends on your personal preferences and needs. Are you looking to do more business? Are you looking to just chill on the beach and go surfing? Both countries have good surfing, by the way. But with that, hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to get residency in Costa Rica or Panama or both for yourself and your family, hit us up, My Latin Life. Probably the best way to get started is to book a call with us, and we can explain your options and go into more detail about some of the things we've been talking about in this video. But with that, thank you for joining us. Check out some of the other videos on this channel. Please be sure to subscribe because we're dropping tons of secret knowledge about Latin America every day to help you make an informed decision about your next adventure. Ciao for now.